Welcome back, everyone. If I'm not mistaken, I think it's time for more Dark Souls 3. We're back in the Road of Sacrifices today to go down to the, quite frankly, charmingly named Crucifixion Woods. We can sort of get our bearings as to where exactly we are by looking up. Our first new enemy in this area are these fellows. They're essentially hollows wielding sharpened tree trunks. And while you might not think that they're particularly dangerous, they actually are. In fact, they're probably one of the most dangerous enemies in this area. They have extremely long reach with their tree pikes, and they tend to come at you in large groups, meaning that it can be very difficult to actually get in on them if you don't have a ranged attack, which is why we are rolling with Heavy Soul Arrow right now. It takes them all out in 2 hits, and they're not particularly evasive, so accuracy is not a concern. They specialize in dangerous charge attacks that can cover a lot of distance quickly. Their entire tree trunk actually, is dangerous during the duration of the charge, so if you try to block it with a shield or dodge it just by sort of sidestepping, you can get punished pretty easily. You need to roll out of the way. You need to make a sharp turn, because the tracking is actually fairly good. It's important not to take on too many at a time, because it's very easy to get overwhelmed. Retreating and getting some distance is always something that you should keep in mind as an option. As just demonstrated there, they can actually cover a lot of distance very quickly with their charges, so you need to play defensively. Occasionally, these enemies will drop the pike weapon, which is sadly not just a sharpened tree trunk, but an actual pike. But either way, as far as I know, that's the only way to get it in the game. I wanted to do some healing here, but then I realized I didn't have enough FP, so I just decided to Estus up. The second new enemy here is a returning fellow from Dark Souls 2. These poison bugs are not very dangerous at all. They go down very easily and they don't move quickly. Just about the only remarkable thing about them is that they can spew a cloud of toxic gas, which can poison you if you stand in it for a while. It's not really a big deal. They do tend to come in even larger numbers than the pikemen, but again, they don't have much in the way of means to defend themselves. Still, if you're not spec'd for it, they can poison you quickly, so there are very few enemies in this game that you can just dismiss out of hand. If you're careless, just about every enemy can fuck you up in some way. Personally, I would say that this is the first area in the game that actually starts to get really darn hard. It's a definite step up compared to the settlement and the high wall. The pikemen are deceptively deadly, and they have enough support in the form of bugs and dogs that they can really pose a problem. Though this dog seems to be confounded by tree. And this is, of course, without even going into the swamp area. We're still on dry land. If you decide to venture out into the water, well, you may have some problems with crabs. The giant crabs in this area are among the most difficult enemies in the game to defeat. They're not exceedingly deadly, but they have a lot of health, they don't stagger easily, and they attack quickly. Also, the terrain in which you fight them is often disadvantageous. We'll deal with them at a later date. There are goodies in the swamp that we really would like to get, so it's not negotiable that we'll have to deal with them eventually. This is another new enemy, the Crucified Hollow. These large enemies are evocative of some of the enemies in Bloodborne. They're quite dangerous, but they're not unmanageable. Their main weakness is that they are staggered quite easily. They have a lot of health, but they've sort of got glass jaws. If you let them attack for any length of time, they can do so quite adeptly, and they're very, very fast and strong and damaging. So it's best to go on the offensive and make sure they don't get the opportunity to hit you. Of course, if there's other enemies running interference, that can be more difficult. You can stagger them easily, however, they're not completely helpless to simply mashing R1. They're quite nimble with their back steps, so you can't just mash on the attack button and expect to win. They will jump back and counterattack fairly effectively. We'll have to come back to that door later from another angle. Well now, it's been a while since we faced one of these in combat. Up ahead is a Black Knight, a wandering warrior of the Lord of Sunlight. They are quite dangerous, especially at this point in the game. First we'll pick up some free armor, and then we'll see what we can do about this fella. Unfortunately, sniping from this position doesn't work very well. The Black Knight is smart enough to simply close the distance, and fighting him up here is sort of a bad idea. We want some room to maneuver around that giant sword. Unlike the Crucifixion Hollows, Black Knights do not necessarily stagger easily. Their giant weapons give them a lot of hyper armor during attacks, and they also have shields to block repeated light attacks. They also do a lot of damage. They're very dangerous enemies, and it's fortunate that we're only facing one right now. Honestly, I think if we were to get hit by that golf swing of his, we would simply get killed in one hit. However, Black Knights and their Silver Knight cousins still share a weakness, and that is backstabbing. Especially the ones with heavy weapons tend to leave their backs open for large amounts of time. So maneuvering around behind them to get in a critical attack is not very difficult, and in fact, probably the best strategy. However, they're a little more adept at hiding it in this installment than they were in the first game. They tend to keep attacking more vigorously than they used to. And their tracking is a bit better as well. Still, a weakness is a weakness, and it's good to exploit them when you can. that particular Black Knight will respawn, and he does drop his equipment, so if you are determined, you can get the entire set if you want here. He'll only drop his greatsword, so if you want a different Black Knight weapon, you'll have to go elsewhere. But if you feel like you really want his shield or his armor, then by all means, you can post up here. Unfortunately, that encounter has sort of tapped us out for now, so we're going to need to go back to the bonfire and rest. These mini crabs are not much more than an annoyance or a distraction. It might be worth farming them, because they do drop occasionally moth clumps, which will reduce status effect buildup, like bleeding and poison. The giant crabs are reasonably vulnerable to ranged attacks, but they can close the distance, quite frankly, more quickly than they should be able to. With their crab walk, really. There's no other word for it. And this is what makes them such a pain in the ass. They will not engage you on dry land. If you so much as step back on the shore, they will simply burrow away and regain all their health. Oh, good. This is the other gimmick of this area. While you're exploring the Crucifixion Woods, members of the Watchdogs of Farron Covenant will occasionally invade you and try to kill you. It's a little bit like the Bell Tower Covenant from Dark Souls 2. So we have no choice but to simply fight this guy. He's wielding an ultra great sword, so he might be slightly twinked out. Yeah, that's a Pontiff Knight sword too. Oh, actually, I think Grey Rat does sell one. Either way, this is a difficult fight, because we are completely out of healing and restorative items, and he's fighting in the swamp where he has friends in the way of giant crab. It seems slightly excessive to resort to that when it's one-on-one, but I've been on the opposite side of this arrangement before, so I understand the desire to do such a thing. This fight is mostly a foregone conclusion. It's unfortunate, but that's just how it goes sometimes. We have a healthy supply of embers, so it's not a big deal to die. We just need to go back and get our souls and we'll be fine. Dog is having some issues with geometry. So am I, actually. This area can be a bit treacherous, just because it's sort of lumpy. Unfortunately, coming from this direction makes it harder to deal with these pikemen. There is much less opportunity to actually separate them, and you pretty much have to take them on as a group. It's a good idea to take them out, even if you're not really planning on exploring the shore anymore. They have reasonable aggro radiuses, so it's best to take care of potential entanglements before they begin. These guys are also fairly vulnerable to backstabbing, but They also go down quickly enough that sometimes that's not necessarily something you have to resort to. Just gonna pop back over in this direction and recover my bloodstain, and we can continue on. It might seem excessive, but it is a good idea to take out the crabs when you see them. The small ones, anyway. They can really get underfoot when you're fighting the large ones. Speaking of which, let's try to do so without interruptions. Their attacks don't actually do that much damage, and they can be blocked reasonably with a shield. This is the attack where you can really punish them. The water spray severely limits their lateral coverage, and it leaves them open for a long period of time. If you do enough damage in a short amount of time, you can actually stagger them and go for a visceral attack. Great Combustion actually works really well against these crabs. Light weapons like the hand axe, however, tend to struggle. They just don't have enough stopping power. Now, unlike the watchdogs, Yellowfinger Hazel is a scripted invasion. A member of Rosaria's Fingers. This is the group that Leonhard belongs to. And I'm gonna be honest here. I have never had trouble with this fight before, but on this character, I get my butt kicked. I think there might be something unique about a caster build that struggles with Hazel. At least my current loadout. She's very resistant to fire and magic. And my hand axe just didn't seem to trade very well with her pick. So I'm making a quick cut here to show the fact that I picked up the Grass Crest Shield, which is an important shield that increases stamina recovery rate. I died a bunch of times here. I don't know why. I legitimately don't know why, except that I'm bad. So I decided a change of tactics is in order. When the going gets tough, the tough use a straight sword. Much better. The raw infusion really helps out here. I also neglected to pick this up earlier. It's the Twin Dragon Great Shield. It's an interesting defensive option. Great Shields have very high stability, but they're heavy, and they don't have access to parry. The Twin Dragon Great Shield in particular is sort of an interesting option because it doesn't even have 100% physical reduction. However, in exchange, it is the lightest of all Great Shields, and it still offers pretty good stability. So if you use it sparingly, there's that pike I was talking about, then it can pay dividends. I'm personally not a big fan. I believe that its physical reduction is 85%, and that's just a little too low for the investment needed. It's not like a light shield that you carry for an extra effect like parrying or regen. The Grass Crest Shield is similar, except that it's a medium shield. It can parry, and it has a very useful alternative effect in the stamina regen. You won't often use it as a defensive tool, but if you do end up using it, it will probably just be strapped to your back as you two-hand something. Well, back into it, I guess. This area is really quite brutal. Another thing to note about Yellowfinger Hazel is that she uses the Obscuring Ring. The Obscuring Ring is a special ring that you can get from leveling up in the Rosaria's Fingers Covenant, whenever we get there, if ever, that will make you invisible from a certain distance. Well, this is just awful. Time to get to higher ground. See if we can lure Hazel up here. Invading red phantoms and invading purple phantoms, like Holy Knight Hodrick, can use their Estus flasks to heal themselves. Fortunately, they never seem to have as much as you do. Hazel attacks with quick sorceries like Farron Dart, as well as her special pick. However, if you're using a faster weapon, like a straight sword, you can outtrade her very easily. Our reward for finally defeating her is her unique pick and returning favorite, the Xanthus Crown. The pick is quite useful, or at least I thought, because it also functions as a sorcery catalyst. And since we went to such lengths to defeat her, I'm just going to go ahead and put on our trophy. As all incarnations of the Xanthus Crown, it looks fairly ridiculous. Still, the protection isn't bad. Now we have to deal with crabs. Circling around to the back is usually the best strategy here. They're fairly vulnerable from behind. Oh, wonderful. Well, I guess we'll just have to leave that crab alone for now. We have bigger fish to fry. Away he goes. Another Farron watchdog has come to play, and we need to deal with him. This guy is using weapons and armor seemingly more appropriate for where we are in the game. He has a buckler and, I believe, a broadsword. It's sort of hard to tell because he's all blue. Great Combustion is not especially useful against human players. So, this guy's strategy appears to be parry fishing. There are a couple of different ways you can deal with that. Ultra heavy weapons like ultra great swords and great axes cannot be parried. So if you see somebody fishing for a parry with one of those, then you can simply use that and not have to worry about it. However, since we are quite scrawny and we only have this straight sword and magic available to us, which is also not especially effective against human players because it takes a while to cast, then we'll need to be more careful. We need to sort of vary our approach and make sure we're not too predictable, otherwise he will simply get a lucky parry eventually. He doesn't seem too skilled at it, but I can hardly criticize on that front. In this particular fight, I found it most effective to wait for him to start two-handing his sword, and then go on the offensive. In the game's current incarnation, I would say that parrying is maybe too strong of an offensive option. With the right equipment, a successful parry more or less ends the fight. And as you can see, there isn't really that much penalty to just spamming it randomly. If you're hyper aggressive, you can punish it with a backstab, but you don't always know when he's going to go for it, so it's a very dangerous game to play. This is sort of taking forever, and for that I apologize, but sometimes that's just how things go. There's not much more to say at this point, because each PvP counter is more or less unique. So I can't really generalize anything from this one. Give him a taste of his own medicine, I guess? I don't know. Things are looking grim. But thanks to the passive regen on my red and white shield, I'm still alive at least. The best advice I can give in a general sense is to vary up your moveset if you can. For instance, I'm trying to make use of the straight sword's weapon art to do mix-ups and things like that, and other fancy fighting game turns. Well, that's that, I guess. The applause gesture is maybe a little condescending, but in that case I meant it sincerely. That was a good fight. He didn't resort to running off. And I didn't resort to summoning a 5 million friendly phantom, so I would call that a successful PvP encounter. Back to the crabs. Blech. Defeating the watchdog did give us a lot of recharges on our Estus Flask, so we are more or less in fine position to continue exploring. Scripted invasions tend to give you a lot back, and player invasions tend to give you even more because you can't plan for them. I didn't have much time to talk about it because of the invasion, but one of the crabs in this area will drop the Great Swamp Ring. Starting as a Pyromancer gives you that ring to begin with, so it's not very useful to us, and rings don't stack if they're the same kind. However, if you do want to use Pyromancies, but you didn't really start as the appropriate class, you do want to kill that crab. The rings that boost spell damage are very important to caster builds. Without using them, your damage is honestly kind of anemic. Just when you think that the swamp can't throw anything more at you, guarding the Fallen Knight set and the entrance to another area are two very powerful NPC scripted enemies. I'm not going to go to them just yet because there's a couple of valuable items in this direction. But if you get a little too willy-nilly in your explorations of that area, you can aggro them both and have a really bad time. This area is a trap. The water here is deep and prevents you from moving at your normal speed. Even your rolls become heavy. Given that that area is patrolled by a giant crab, going for those two valuable items, such as the Pyromancy Tome, which we can give to Cornix for more stuff, will result in a death if you're not careful. The safest way is to simply take out the crab beforehand, but given how much trouble we've had in this area up to this point, it had simply slipped my mind. And here they are. These two are the Exiles, and they like to parry fish as well. They both use ultra-heavy weapons and wear heavy armor. This does not impair their rolling or movement in any way, so they must have a lot of vitality. Fighting them both at once is extremely difficult. And extremely punishing. I very nearly died there, but the HP regen from the shield once again saved my life. To have much of a chance here, you need to separate them and learn their attack patterns. The one with the giant curved sword is arguably easier to deal with. He moves quite predictably. He is very fond of using his weapon art, which sends him into a multi-spin spinning slash. You can't reliably interrupt him from it, but if you simply wait it out, he's very vulnerable after he uses it because it uses most of his stamina. Not all of it, though. If he has the presence of mind, he can roll away. It's difficult to see, but the one with the curved greatsword also uses a cestus, which he can use for swift offhand attacks and parrying if he's feeling saucy. For a victory against him, we get his Exile curved greatsword, which is probably the most powerful curved greatsword in the game in terms of raw attack power. It's a pretty strong weapon. Now, as if nothing else could go wrong in this recording, I actually end up losing the other Exile with the Great Club. I simply have no idea where he went. And, you know, I want that weapon for posterity's sake, so I need to go on a hunt for him. There are a couple of items to get around here, so it's not a total waste of time while I look for him, but at this point my eyes were just kind of rolling out of my head at how much had gone wrong in this recording. Once again, chest-high walls prove our undoing. We can't get to that item just yet. Despite the fact that it really looks like we could just, you know, sort of reach up and grab it. The small crabs drop both varieties of moss clumps, so if you need them, it might not be a bad idea to kill a couple here and there. Where is this guy? Oh, he got stuck behind a tree. That's sort of sad. The Exile with the Great Club is a little bit more difficult to deal with. However, if he decides to just chain cast miracles, then that gives you approximately 5 years to actually just wail on him. And I would have killed him there if I'd been paying attention and realized that I hadn't run out of FP. But the evildoers are vanquished, and we get his large stick. Both of these weapons require a lot of strength and vitality to wield effectively. If one is feeling cheesy or impatient, it's very easy to bait those two into simply falling down this pit by going down the ladder. below is a bonfire and a new area that we won't be going to for a while, and thank God for that. Until next time.